है क्या लाउड़े?
Lando Norris and Max Verstappen have decided not to continue with their monthly night outs at Martin Garrix's events for the next 1 year. The bromance is over. Welcome to the review of the Austrian Grand Prix 2024. My name is Eben and you are watching the Pit Lane Chronicles. We are now at the Austrian Grand Prix after that strategical masterclass of Big Brain Hannah at the Spanish Grand Prix. This was all said to be a make or break for many teams, especially McLaren and Ferrari, because they had to somehow reduce that gap that Max and Red Bull as a constructor had over them. The field has got tighter. McLaren can be said that they are actually the fastest car on the track or on the grid currently, followed by Red Bull and then the Mercedes. Ferrari have surely fallen back. They are somewhat 100th of a second close to the Red Bulls and probably have like better race pace. And it's just literally Max Verstappen on his own who is carrying this Red Bull team, because Sergio Perez post that contract extension has just gone into some limbo and he's barely even qualifying for Q3 right now.
Disgusting!
Now with so much of technological convergence this year and probably way more closer in the next year as well, we just don't want the 2026 regulations, right? I mean, it feels as if the FIA themselves are the biggest enemies of the sport. Now, for the initial 3-4 years, there's always one team who just simply is like outdoing the others, and then eventually after 3 or 4 years when the other teams try to catch up and are almost there, then they just simply change the rules, which just kills the entire competition once again. Coming to the Austrian Grand Prix, it's a sprint weekend and everyone was like expecting results like in the previous sprints, where the sprint qualifying and the sprint race would act as a major spoiler for the race. But then no one knew that the second half of the race would be that diabolical and would just give us so much entertainment to look forward to the next Grand Prix in Britain, Silverstone. As a build-up to this race, Mercedes had called the police after certain mails were sent to Formula 1 journalists stating the planned sabotage of Lewis Midfielden in Mercedes. Flavio Briatore, the Vijay Mallya of Formula 1, came back in advisory role to the Alpine. Christian Horner and Jos Verstappen were fighting on who had the bigger one. Ego, you naughty guys.
Naughty.
Gamer boy Yuki got fined for using ableist language in between the qualifying on Saturday. The race starts fine without incidents. Everyone behaved really well except for Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc had front wing damage from Piastri's rear, unlucky, which led to him pitting and he got out on hards after the very first lap.
I am stupid.
We then had the Mercedes civil war initially. Oscar Piastri pulled a brilliant move on Perez, followed by Sigma Alonso window licking on the Chinese wall. Very aggressive, Sigma Alonso. We then had Alpine Civil War part 4326 later on for a couple of laps. All these events prevented from making this race a snooze fest before the actual bomb dropped. It's lap 51 and Max Verstappen was on his way to win this race. He wasn't happy with the middle stint on hards, with regular complaints about having no grip and the car not turning properly. But then the lead over Norris was a decent one and he was managing it fine. He was already like 6.5 to 7 seconds ahead of Norris before he pit at lap 51, which was a reasonable one and he could have easily managed it. But then he pits for an older set of mediums. Now this is where the problem came up, and Norris also pit at the very same time, but then he got in a new set of mediums. Now Red Bull had actually used up their new set of mediums during the final practice session on Friday, and they had to actually use the same set of used tires, scrubbed tires, for this last stint. Red Bull Racing just did a Ferrari and messed up the pit stop to allow Norris to be just 2 seconds behind Verstappen after both got out. Eventually Norris got in the DRS range behind Verstappen with almost 15 laps to go. Everyone had their hands inside their pants. People were waiting for Norris in the papaya car to get that overtake done in the DRS zone. It's turn 3. It should be called the relationship breaker turn. He tried once, it didn't happen. The very next lap he gets close and dive bombs, but that isn't enough. So Norris in the middle of all this gets a message from the team that he was pushing too hard and he had violated multiple track limit breaches by then, and he was walking on thin ice. He lunges out again the very next lap when there were 11 laps left, that is the 59th lap. Verstappen moves under braking. Their cars touch very hard and both get punctures. The F1 world loses its mind. The social media jumps to life. Hashtag Team LH come out of their cave with hindsight comments like, "We told ya." It's all bonkers and diabolical. McLaren wants an international tribunal on Verstappen and his team. Andres Stella literally loses it by saying that the stewards should have stopped Max back in 2021 to prevent this from happening in 2024. Lando Norris saying that he might lose all his respect for Max if he doesn't accept his mistake. They are actually breaking up, aren't they? This entire incident was actually built up to this particular instant, right? If we go back in the previous races, Lando in the Canadian Grand Prix, even though with the faster car, couldn't manage to win. At the Spanish Grand Prix last week, he couldn't manage to stop Max from overtaking at the very first turn and eventually fell to third place at the very start, even though he got the pole and had the best race pace. In the sprint, in the very same Austrian weekend, that is Saturday, he couldn't manage to keep Verstappen behind him even with DRS. All these fails do actually attack you there in your inner conscious. Am I even good enough to challenge Max, or whether I'm just giving too much respect to Max? This boiled out eventually in the multiple dive bombs he tried, which was just unnecessary. He had the fastest car, he had the fresher tires, and there was like 12 laps to go. That meant 36 more DRS zones to make overtakes. In my opinion, both drivers are at fault for displaying poor racecraft, because Max, being the ruthless aggressive driver, he also just didn't want Norris to pass through a dive bomb. Max says that Lando was dive bombing regularly and he had to adapt accordingly to prevent losing out on the position at turn 3. Which is fair, but you can't be moving around in the braking zone, maxi pad. And then there came the Charles fangirls in the middle of all that, writing that Lando just wasn't fit enough for a World Driver Championships challenge with Max.
You shut up!
In the midst of all this chaos, the international terrorist Osama bin Russell goes through and wins the race. I mean, what a farce race.
Yes! 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 No! 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 Shit!
And then by Pookie, Oscar did get a podium and he managed to get a well-fought second after his third place qualifying timing got deleted by an awkward decision made by the stewards. For this year's Austrian Grand Prix, certain small changes were made to the Red Bull ring, which included certain gravel traps introduced especially in that final sector. So gravel traps are usually always there to negate any sort of advantage that the drivers could gain through overshooting of the track limits. So this is what actually happened in the case of Oscar Piastri in Q3 of the qualifying. Actually qualified third behind Max and Norris, but then because of this over policing from the stewards who deleted the track timings because he had gone over the limits. Yes, he might have crossed the white line, but then he actually went over the gravel trap, which is there for the purpose of self-policing the driver's advantage. We have our next Grand Prix at the Silverstone track in Great Britain, which could be the annual show up for the climate activists by invading the tracks. And I wouldn't personally mind if a Mad Max or a Mad Lando could just simply run them over. So, if you liked the video, do press the like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe to the channel. And see you all in the next video. Ciao.